Good morning and welcome to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours.
Virtually. This is gardenataz.org. I'm Janet McConovich.
We're coming to you from gardenataz.org. I'm Stephen Nicola. We're really good at this morning.
And this is a special edition of our webinars because of the severe weather that we had this winter that meant there were a lot of questions. We opened up all of March, and right now this is in our garden session for late March. In our garden sessions being all of the things that we're seeing right now that are going on, and lots of time for your questions. That's the two of us, and also the invisible one that is in the chat window, taking care of all of the technical problems and helping everyone get their questions answered, is our daughter Sonia Nicola, who is a great gardener, but also a professor at the University of Toronto, which means that she's got lots of experience with Zoom and webinar fields. And that's more often how you find us, is Sonia and I poking around doing stuff. I think we were laughing about how much her husband likes roses and how much trouble I think roses are. But generally, it's two of us poking around and Steve taking pictures.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if oftentimes I'm not where they are, I might be like in this instance at Guelph Arboretum or something like that.
Out trolling for pictures. And he does most of the pictures for the things we do. I do most of the words. Sonia does words and pictures.
Yeah.
As fitting the next generation. And we've been doing this for about 40 years, been writing things down and putting them into our website. We got a sponsorship that means that we can put a little bit more up on our website so that we don't have to keep looking it up in all of these files that are in the closet behind us and in the file cabinets and in boxes in the garage.
That doesn't count the slides.
We put the things that we've looked up and researched for people or seen in gardens and are still looking for. We put them up on gardenataz.org and hope that other people will use them and contribute more information, because that's how we think everybody learns best, is to talk about what's going on in the garden.
Okay.
So walking around outside this time of year, look for changes. I always have to remind myself that things change, conditions change. I was looking one year at the boxwood and the yew in this garden, which is an important garden to me. There are evergreen boughs laid on the ground there. That's a steep little hill in the garden, and that's erosion control, not an actual plant. But I looked at the boxwood and the yew and was wondering, why are they getting thin? I was busy with my magnifier looking to see what kind of insects there might be or pests there might be. I'd cut the boxwood back as usual the year before, and they were sprouting, but not as vigorously as they should be sprouting. So you kind of stand back and look around, and I realized that it had been 20 years, and these linden trees planted on the street on the south side of the courtyard. So all of the sun is coming in from that side. And these linden trees have gotten big and gotten full, and have a lot of branches down low, soaking up all the sun, blocking all the sun, and it's time to prune those. And if you look, so the garden where I work is right in where Steve is pointing right now. That's the opening between the red brick building, the house that our client owns, and the white building next to it. And those are the linden trees. There's two of them in front of it.
Two.
Now you look down the street and there are linden trees all down the street. And it isn't a perspective thing that you're looking at. The trees in front of this garden are easily 2 times, almost 3 times bigger than those down the street, because this is the only lot with a garden with soil behind it, and this one
and water.
Right. So these trees are taking advantage of our garden being there. We did have them pruned. Talked to the city and got an arborist and came out to prune and elevate the trees, and it made a huge difference. And it's probably time to do it again, because this was 10 years ago.
It really is amazing how just limbing up just a little bit and possible a little bit of thinning in the crown can open up an extra hour and a half of light in that garden. Made a big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. So look around. Most of us have been in our present gardens for a while, and things grow. We don't realize that shrubs are leaning over other shrubs. trees are overarching things. Sometimes it's a matter of losing a tree and getting sun or
Yeah.
frost where you weren't before. And you gotta be realistic about if you're gonna put up with that shade.
Shade.
So here's a hedge of probably a lantana viburnum, maybe a leatherleaf viburnum hybrid. It's a great hedge because it keeps its leaves from this year. It keeps this year's leaves through the winter until the next the leaves come out the next spring.
Majority of the time. You can never say absolutely all the
Right,
time.
right. Yeah, there are some winters when it does drop them off, but it makes it a block even in the wintertime.
Yep.
But look at the shady end of that hedge. The only difference between this part on the right and the rest of it is the shade from that tree. It's not only shorter, but it's thinner, less dense, and that is the way that it must be here. We get questions all the time from people who show us pictures of a rhododendron, a Pyrrhus japonica, a boxwood, a spirea growing in the shade, and it's open, and they say, "Can I prune it to make it denser?" No, if you prune it, all it's going to do is grow back out again, putting a leaf in every bit of air that has enough light to support the leaf. And if there's not that much light, it's not going to be denser. So be realistic.
Shade is dense.
It's dark. Yeah,
If you're in evergreen shade and
that's sugar maples and white pines,
big
shading
leaves,
that area back there. The only plants that we look at when people say, I want to put a screen in, I want to make it so that I don't look through and I'm growing in the shade. There's not a lot of plants that we think of in putting in places like that, not in zone 5-6 anyway. Our first bet is always a yew. Yews are more shade tolerant than any of the other evergreens, and they make a good screen, but they too are going to be thinner in the shade. And most of us who are in the shade, as in this garden here, have deer problems too. So the yew is not going to work for them. In which case, the leatherleaf viburnum that we just showed you is a good option. You can see it's going to be thinner in the shade, but it's still going to grow in the shade. A natural shade plant that you'll find in the woods, in pretty darn dense woods, is the lindera, the spice bush, the native Lindera bensuan. And it likes water.
it has to have moisture.
Yeah.
And it's not a super dense shrub. Like it's not as dense in the winter as the leatherleaf would be, but it is a nice, really nice shrub.
Yeah, and we like to remind people that you don't necessarily need foliage all the way to the ground. If you're trying to screen something, it's probably your eye level that you're trying to screen. So think about that you don't have to try to force these plants to grow.
You also have this option of building up gradually and having the foreground provide a little bit more of your screen too.
True. Birkwood viburnum is another one that will keep its leaves in many winters.
And handles shade.
And it smells nice, whereas the leatherleaf does not smell good. And bottlebrush buckeye, also going to be thin, but those are the things that I would put in.
We grow our bottlebrush in the shade, and it should be about 8 foot tall right now, and it's probably about 4.
Right.
And just now starting to spread. It should have blooms that are about this big, and they're about this big, and so there's differences, but it's a beautiful plant out there. It's doing well. And
this year might be its a year to thrive, because the white pines above it lost lots of branches.
And it's going to be limbed up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Cornus moss. This is a moss, you think?
Moss or officinalis.
It's either Cornelian cherry or the Cornelian dogwood. This blooms before the forsythia. Probably coming into bloom right now.
I think I saw one starting. And
it's an understory plant, so it'll grow in the woods under other plants, but it's not going to look like this in the understory.
No.
This is the density of being out in the open, a pretty plant. And the same thing goes for some of the smaller shrubs. This is deutzia. A couple of weeks ago, people were asking about deutzia, and I said, well, we haven't shown anybody deutzia yet. There's Cotoneaster to the right.
That's Cotoneaster.
And deutzia to the left. It's pretty. I'm not going to show you the pretty little flowers because that's not what it's here for. Here it is in the full shade. This is on the north side of a house next to the, it gets no direct sun there.
Some of the light it gets is simply reflected
light off of there. Whereas these are getting sun all afternoon, shade in the morning, sun in the afternoon. And while I had them out, I thought, well, people asked about pruning deutzia. They're spring blooming shrubs, and they also creep. They lean over, root, and keep going, so they become a ground cover. If you want to keep them contained, then while they're dormant, thin them out. So that's thinned. I've taken some of the old branches right out of there. And then after they've bloomed, so they've finished blooming, there's seed pods along the branches there. After they've bloomed, thin them again, take some branches out. That keeps them from laying on the ground and rooting and taking over everything. Unless you want them to take over everything, because they are good for that. And you can take quite a bit out of them. That's deutzia, that's the dwarf deutzia called Nico. So what questions are there about changes in your garden or shady shrubs?
Yeah, so Mary Ellen is asking, if shrubs are in shade, how old of a shrub can you transplant? When I clarified about the kind of shrub, she said use rhodos or boxwoods.
How old? You know, it's not
old, it's size.
Yeah, it's not a matter of how old it is so much as whether it's been grown in those same conditions. If it's a very large plant and it's been sun grown and you put it into the shade, you're going to see no growth on it for a while, because it's going to be resetting itself for a less intense light. It's going to thin itself out. It'll probably lose some branches on the interior, but it won't be doing much growing. So I don't know how to answer that for how large a shrub. I moved to Berkwood viburnum from the shade in the backyard of that house with the shady deutzia, and it was 6 feet tall and 6 feet. I mean, we tied it all up, and I moved that shrub out to the shade underneath the maple, and it made the move just great. But it was moving from pretty shady to pretty shady.
Yeah.
If I'd moved it from the full sun, I think it would have looked pretty crummy for a while.
And it works the other way too, that coming out from the shade into full sun, it's not used to having that sun on it, and it may slow down the first year or two and then take off.
Yeah, if it's fully leafed out, when you move it from the shade out into the sun, you can scorch it. But yeah, they have to realign themselves for the amount of light that they've got. So the younger shrubs are better. But if you're in a hurry, go ahead, go big. How long ago did we put those yews in Julie's backyard? Julie, I don't think is here today. She said she had a meeting, but it seems like it's been 7 or 8 years. And I would say that for the first 3 years, those yews just sat. Yeah, we got 4-foot yews, so good. We got to start with something big, but they sat at 4 feet for 3 years before they started growing.
All right. We also have a question from Ed about what kinds of tree, shrubs, or evergreens do well in wind. In wind, the pines and the junipers are your choice in wind if you can. The broadleaf evergreens don't do very well.
No, they dry out their leaves.
Yeah, you can put yews in the wind certainly, but they're not as happy there as a juniper. So that you're looking for those needles that have a bit of blue to them are going to be your best bet, because they're protecting themselves from wind and sun with that. Are there particularly good ones? Our native white pine, the Scots pine, red pine, but not the Japanese pine. The Japanese white pine is an understory plant, doesn't like to be out in the wind. Any of the Chinese junipers, like the spreading junipers, and there are some upright junipers, and our native junipers, Virginia juniper,
deciduous.
What other evergreens?
Drawing a blank on deciduous in the wind too.
What deciduous? Oh, did we ask for deciduous? I thought we were looking for.
He just said trees, shrubs, or evergreens.
Oh, okay. Hawthorns.
Yes.
Amelanchiers, birches. You're looking for pioneer plants in the deciduous. The ones that show up first in the forest.
Oaks.
Think about those poplar leaves rustling in the wind. They're
aspens.
Oaks.
But those pioneer plants are great in the open, and they set up a situation for other plants to get going. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then Judith is saying, speaking of moving a plant, I have a small mature hydrangea that I'd like to move from a too shady place. Is this an acceptable time to transplant it? And if so, what can I do to minimize the trauma of moving. Make sure your snowshoes are on. Be careful of walking too much in the garden. That's my first advice, and I'll let Janet and Steve take it from here.
Yeah, that's true. Be careful walking on the garden, but you can certainly move it now.
Yeah,
And that's one of the ways that you avoid trauma. Move it before it's leafed out.
yeah, get it now and take as much root as you can.
If you have to bare root it, like we showed in transplanting a shrub just recently, in maybe 2 newsletters ago, we dug around the outside and took a much larger root mass than we could have taken with soil on it.
Yeah.
by rinsing the soil off and shaking the soil off of the roots and moving.
So a little more work and a little messier at the beginning.
But we also, I'm pretty sure in the fall, showed you dragging a hydrangea that had been ripped out by the workman putting in an egress window.
Yes.
Just pulled it out of the ground, and I looked and said, well, it's got enough root, and I put it in. We're going to watch to see how well that one
See what
does.
happens.
So some of them are going to grow despite anything you do to them. But I would get the hole ready first that you're moving it to.
Yeah,
Dig it with as much root as you can, put it on a tarp or something that you can slide it along, and put on your snowshoes or put planks, something to walk on so that you're not going to mess up your soil.
and try not to dig the hole too deep. Once you break up that bottom, it settles and the plant can sink low too. So keep
We
keep your original hole at it.
they used to tell us to dig a deep hole, and that's not where roots go. Don't dig a deep hole. Don't disturb the soil directly underneath the plant and have it settle afterwards. I see Jean asking about arborvitaes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, she says she has 3 huge arborvitaes we love because they afford us a lot of privacy. I've shaped them kind of like huge mushrooms. I have hostas growing underneath. This last storm wreaked havoc on the middle one. Of course, it's always the asymmetrical piece. I may turn them into bonsai arborvitaes, but I'm afraid if I do, they won't be supported and will break in the next storm. So it's got some serious breaks, but the weather seems to be calling for rain for the next week.
I have to tell you that we have a picture of one of Jean's arborvitaes coming up in the webinar here someplace. I've forgotten exactly where we put it, but I appreciated your tour around your garden, Jean, and there are questions we're going to be able to be using for weeks there.
Yep.
But your arborvitaes are, if they are strong, it's not going to make them weaker to take some wood out. If the wood is strong to begin with and can support the branch, it can support the branch. So if you're looking to open them up some, then do that. And you probably need to open them up if you've been trimming them in a globe for a long time. They've gotten dense across the top, and then you can't make your sides come in because no light is getting through the top to keep the side branches green to some depth inside the plant. So reach in and take out the dead wood that's at the lowest level and reach up and take things out so that light gets through at the top. I think it might make more sense when we show the picture, so we'll get back to that a little bit later.
Okay, then I think that will probably do it for this round. I will note you had mentioned when you were talking about Muhlenbergia at the start that you invoked whether Sue Gruba would be here, not to put her on blast, as the kids say, but I do see her name. So if you wanted to see if she had any advice to share.
Oh, great, Sue. I don't know if you were here when people were asking about Muhlenbergia, and whether it was invasive. And I said, I don't remember. I seem to remember it was in Sue Gruba's ornamental grasses class, but I have not grown it. So if you're here and if you're listening, you can chime in anytime.